Hey guys, it's Bella. Welcome back to my channel. Glad to see ya. I hope you guys had a great weekend. If you're new here, welcome. We talk about true crime cases here on this channel on Mondays. So if that's something that you're interested in, then please come and join us. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. Today we're going to be talking about the case of Ted Ammon, and this case is like something straight out of Hollywood. It's like something straight out of The Great Gatsby. It involves love affairs, secret espionage, it involves conspiracies, it involves a lot of money. Ted was a very wealthy investment banker and he was found savagely murdered in his mansion in East Hampton, and this happened just before his divorce was set to finalize, and to this day this case is one of the most infamous cases in the Hamptons. Before we do get into it, I just quickly want to thank today's sponsor NordVPN, my tried and true. I practically live on my VPN, honestly. I always put myself back in Australia to shop because shopping in Australia is so much cheaper than London. Lululemon, for example, I always put my VPN on to put me on the Australian website, and I order all of my Lululemon stuff or whatever to my parents' house and get them to ship it over because I don't know why, but it's so much cheaper there. I always use it to watch my shows. I used it to watch Love Island USA. I always use it to watch MAFS Australia because MAFS Australia is the superior reality TV. It's so good. I don't know why the Australian one is so good, but trust me guys, it is so good. And they do air Married at First Sight Australia here in the UK, but it doesn't start until the whole season is already finished in Australia, and I just can't have that. So I watch it in real time on my VPN. And also public Wi-Fi. Public Wi-Fi actually it shivers my timbers. It really does shiver my timbers. And I can't use public Wi-Fi unless I have my VPN on. I'm too scared. So I just practically always have my VPN on. Truly, always I have it on. If there's one thing I can recommend to you, it's to get NordVPN. And if you go to nordvpn.com/bellafiore, you will also get a huge discount with the purchase of a 2-year plan plus an extra 4 months free, and it's totally risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So I will leave all of that information in the description box down below for you guys. Make sure you check it out. I'll leave the link there too. And let's go ahead and get into today's case. So Theodore Ammon was born August 30th, 1949 to parents Robert and Betty Lee, and he also had a sister named Sandy. They were a middle-class family. His dad ran a steel company office and coached Little League baseball, and his mum was a trained dietitian but decided to work as a stay-at-home mum and raise the kids. They were raised in East Aurora in New York, which is a town just outside of Buffalo. And Ted grew up to be, you know, that classic all-American guy that you see in the movies. He was 6'4", he was good looking, he was smart, he had a great personality, and he had a lot of, you know, hobbies and passions. He loved playing the trumpet. When he was in college, he played varsity lacrosse and he was a part of Phi Gamma Delta, which I guess is like a frat there at his uni, and he graduated from Bucknell University in Pennsylvania where he majored in economics. After graduating, he joined the Bank of America's executive training program, and in this program there was another woman there that he met named Randy Day, who was also part of the program, and he fell in love with her and they were married in 1973, after which time they decided to move to London. In London, Ted became a solicitor at Norton Rose Botterill and Roche, which was an easy transition for him because he had actually passed the bar exams in both New York and Great Britain without ever having graduated law school, so he was a very, very smart guy to say the least. Then after nearly a decade in London, his wife Randy was transferred back to New York, so they decided to make the move back and he joined a prominent firm there. He absolutely fell in love with New York and just with the city life, but his marriage did not survive the big city life, and so very shortly after they moved to New York, they got a divorce after nearly 9 years of marriage. And this was a really big time of just like major life changes for Ted as well, because there was a massive move, a divorce, and then he also decided to have a big career change. So he left the firm he was working for and decided to get into investment banking, and he started working at a place called Kohlberg, Kravis, Roberts & Co., which was a small investment firm when, you know, he started working there, but it quickly grew very, very big. Ted also worked his way up to becoming a partner at the firm as well, and he was, you know, just a really hard worker. He had a lot of brilliant ideas. This is what his co-workers said about him. He was really motivated, and they said that he almost seemed more motivated by the art of the deal rather than the money that he would gain from the deal. He was also part of this humongous deal, a $31 billion deal that kicked back millions of dollars to every KKR partner that was involved. So all this to say, he was, very good at what he did, very hardworking, and he made a butt ton of money in his new career. He was just very good at everything he did. And eventually, with all of this new money, he wanted to go and find a new apartment for himself. He was looking for one to rent originally. And so he got in contact with a real estate agent named Generosa Rand. And he and Generosa just hit it off right away. He was said to be smitten with her from the moment that he laid eyes on her. And they ended up getting married in 1986. They lived together on 75th Street before buying a townhouse on East 92nd Street, which was between 5th and Madison Avenue. So if you know anything about New York, it's a very prominent area in New York. When they did get married, Generosa decided to leave her real estate career, and she instead managed the couple's interior decorating, and she also managed their social life, because I guess, I don't know if it's actually like this in real life, but from what I looked into when I was researching this case, it almost seems like New York high society is kind of like the movies. Like, there is this high society and it's all these rich, wealthy people, and they do events and they have to keep up appearances, and it's like, it sounds like a full-time job being rich, like just having money in New York City and being part of this like elite society sort of thing. They have these crazy social lives. So she managed that, and then she also became a serious writer. So she got a bunch of ribbons doing this. She was doing shows all over America, some as far as Florida. Now, where Ted had sort of what you would consider a normal upbringing and had a very successful life, he just kind of went from success to success. Different story to tell of her life growing up until she met Ted. She was raised by a single mother named Marie Therese Legay in Laguna Beach, California, alongside her older sister. When she was just 10 years old, her mother tragically died of brain cancer, and both of the girls were sent to a foster home, and they took the foster family's surname of Rand. Then, when she was 17 years old, her sister died in a car accident, and this was really, really hard on her, as I'm sure you can imagine, because they had been together all of this time. They had gone through everything in their lives together, so many hardships they had gone through together. And she also said that she felt like her sister was her only protection against what she described as an abusive family. So she was saying that her foster family and her home life with her foster family was abusive, and now she was sort of alone in that. So, she had a very difficult upbringing. She had been through a lot of hardships in life, but she really didn't let this hold her back and stop her from her aspirations. She enrolled in the University of California at Irvine, at which time, when she went to college, she became estranged from her adoptive family. She graduated from college in 1981, at which point she moved to New York all by herself, and she became an apartment real estate agent. So she would show apartments to aspiring tenants, at which point she landed Ted as a client and met Ted. After getting married in 1986, they started trying to have a baby. For some time, they tried in vitro, but they were not able to have a baby. So in 1992, they went to Ukraine to adopt twins. They were 2 years old, one boy and one girl named Gregory and Alexa. And Ted's friend said when they came back from New York with the kids, Ted was deliriously happy. And in anticipation of the children, the couple had bought a weekender house in 1992 as well at 59 Middle Lane in East Hampton. It was a $2.7 million home. And when they purchased it, it was a one-story cottage with a huge backyard, a small pond, a big oak tree in the backyard, and it also had a really large front garden as well. Of course, like I said, Generosa handled the interior decorating, and she decided to renovate the whole house, and she got to work on that. She worked tirelessly on it and soon morphed it into a 2-story, 6-bedroom English style home. This year, 1992, was a massive year for the family because they're doing all this, they're renovating this huge house, they brought 2 beautiful children into their lives, and Ted, much to the surprise of everybody at the company, also decided to leave KKR and start his own business, which he called Big Flower Printing Press. And the reasoning behind this name actually is because he was driving, the whole family was driving from New York to their East Hampton home, and on the drive there was this big field of sunflowers, and one of the two kids looked out the window and pointed at the flowers and said, "Big flower." And he said that was the inspiration behind the name of his company. He had big, big dreams for this company, and just like everything else he did in his life, he worked hard to make those dreams a reality, and this company was wildly successful. It grew very quickly. It became a publicly traded company called Vertis, and by 1999, they were doing $2 billion in annual gross revenue. From the outside, it really looked like everything was perfect. They were the perfect family. They had, two beautiful children, a house in New York, a weekender dream mansion in East Hampton. They had a lot of money. Ted was very successful. His career was going very well, but those who knew the couple knew that behind the scenes, things weren't as picture perfect as they seem. They never really are they? They had some serious issues in their relationship, and those who knew the couple said that Generosa came across as abrasive, controlling, temperamental. She would get really angry about trivial things. She was always seeking validation from those around her, and she was desperate to know that people approved of her and liked her, which, everybody wants to be liked, but apparently she was like really to an extreme. Going back to the house renovations of the East Hampton home, she worked with an architect on that named Jeff Gibbons, and he said, and I quote, "She basically left me crumpled on the side of the road." He said that she bullied him for years. She bullied him throughout the whole renovation of the East Hampton home, and she also wouldn't let him take credit for any of the work. So there was one point when she heard that he had been in town telling people that he worked on the house with her, and she contacted him and she's like, "How dare you take credit for my work? It was all me. These were all my ideas. You're not telling people that you designed my house." She didn't pay him his last bill, and she also threatened to destroy him with, her fancy, expensive lawyers. And this was really not an ideal situation for him as well, because he had actually left the company that he was working for as an architect to go out on his own, and she was unfortunately his first client. So it really wasn't an ideal situation for him. And the same can be said for the gardener that she hired as well. The gardener was a guy named Peter Cicero, and once he landed her as a client, he decided to leave the company that he had been working for and go out on his own and do his own sort of gardening business. But once he started working with Generosa, he severely regretted that, because, she was just doing all of this crazy stuff. She got him to plant 600 tulips, which she picked out, mind you. And then one day he comes past the house and she's there ripping them all out of the ground by hand because she said they weren't the right shade, they weren't the right yellow. And then she ordered him to pay for them, to pay for the 600 tulips that she was ripping out, that she chose. She also made him pay for all of these yellow roses that he had planted along the fence, and again, they were the wrong shade. She ripped them all out by hand and made him pay out of pocket for all of those roses. He had to remove the trees that he had planted near the front door at his own cost because she realized that they didn't grow berries, which you would think that's something that you would look into before planting them. If you wanted plants that grew berries, you would get a berry tree. But on top of all of that, she one time at 5 a.m. called his bookkeeper saying she was really annoyed about the pool because the bubbles in the pool were blowing the wrong way. I don't know if she called his bookkeeper because she couldn't get in contact with him because it was 5 a.m. or what the deal was. I don't know what a gardener has to do with bubbles blowing the wrong way. Maybe she's like blaming him for where the trees were planted, so they're blowing things in a direction she doesn't like. I don't know. It's very unhinged. These were not the only two people that she kind of acted like this with, as I'm sure you can imagine. It seems like it's a common occurrence, but there was another contractor that had a similar experience, and they said about her, quote, "She did have vision and she was genuinely creative. I sort of admired her as a woman. She was really powerful, but that power could be genuinely scary." Friends of the couple also noticed that there was a lot of tension between them as well. She started correcting Ted in public, in front of people, like very kind of intensely. One time they were at a parent-teacher conference and he was talking to a woman there, I guess another parent, and she came over to them and she started screaming at this woman to stop flirting with her husband. Colleagues of Ted said that they would call him at home sometimes to talk about work, as you have to do, he's got his own company. And if they did call him at home, they would get an earful from Generosa that apparently left them shaking, they said. Allegedly, Ted confided in his sister as well that he was miserable and that every day Generosa would make him these to-do lists of things that he had to do both at home and at the office. She had very, very intense, volatile mood swings. She was also extremely jealous, to the point that she was jealous of the attention that he would pay to his mum and his sister, and she would try to convince him that his childhood wasn't as great as he remembered. She would also call Ted's sister in tears, saying that he didn't love her enough, that she had built this perfect life for them and, he should love her more for it. I read a report that Ted suggested to her that he encouraged her to go and see a psychologist, but she refused. He wanted to go to marriage counseling as well. They may or may not have gone to marriage counseling, but these issues were just huge and they were really, really wearing away at the couple and their marriage, to the point that they decided the only thing that they could do to try and repair it was to move away from New York. They said it was for the sake of their children, but friends believe it was kind of a last-ditch effort to rekindle their marriage. So in 1999, Ted makes the decision to sell his company and the family moves from New York City to the UK countryside. And this was meant to be, the UK countryside is meant to be a slow place where you can have some solitude and some peace and quiet. But unfortunately, because Ted was selling his company, this was a massive deal. He was traveling back and forth between New York City and the UK quite a lot. So they had purchased a house in Surrey. It was a manor house, which of course Generosa did up and renovated and did the whole interior design of. So on the weekends, Ted would be there, and then all throughout the week, he would have to go back to New York where he would stay in the Lowell Hotel. So he was only with his family on the weekends. And this honestly caused even more issues in the relationship because Generosa started to believe that Ted was having an affair. He was this handsome, tall, successful, wealthy businessman who wouldn't take the opportunity to try and get their hands on him, is her thought process, while he's away from his family on the other side of the world 5 out of 7 days a week. She also found a receipt for a divorce attorney on Ted's desk, which only furthered her suspicions. And so she decided to hire a private investigator to look into her husband to really find out if her suspicions were correct, if he was having an affair. As a result, she started to believe that he was having an affair with this beautiful blonde investment banker in New York who was described by colleagues as a little older version of Gwyneth Paltrow. She was made millions of dollars a year. She had a house in the Hamptons. She was described as savvy, sophisticated, bright, beautiful, and basically, people said that she was the antithesis of Generosa. She also had a child, which Generosa started to believe was actually Ted's child, which all of his friends said no. Apparently the dad was this very well-known businessman in Manhattan, so it couldn't have been Ted's kid, but Generosa believed that it was a love affair child of Ted's and this woman's. Anyway, at this point, the marriage is effectively over and Generosa is very, very bitter. The family decides to move back to Manhattan in the summer of 2000, but Generosa and Ted are living separately. And at this point, Generosa decides to file for divorce, and she was seeking over $2.5 million a year for living expenses, and she wanted half of his fortune, claiming he was worth closer to $300 million rather than the $100 million he claimed that he was worth. She had a lot of demands. Let me read them to you. Within this $2.5 million a year that she wanted, this reportedly included demands for $50,000 annually for a bodyguard, $50,000 for a housekeeper, $50,000 for a chef, $50,000 for a driver, $30,000 for a gardener, $100,000 for an assistant, $60,000 in residential maintenance. And this was only for her life in New York City. She also wanted $100,000 of maintenance a year for their manor home in Surrey, and she wanted $180,000 a month in just, basic living expenses for herself. So, as I'm sure you can imagine, it was gearing up to be a very, very messy divorce right from the start. Ted's net worth was also very spread out among a lot of assets, so it's going to take a very good lawyer to get into it all and make sure that everything with this divorce is done properly. Generosa went through lawyer after lawyer. She kept hiring and then firing them until she found one that she was finally happy with. As the divorce was all ongoing, she also cut off pretty much all of her friends. She had only moved to New York and I guess kind of got ingrained in Ted's life. So a lot of their friends, I gathered, were mutual friends. And so whenever Ted would go and have coffee or lunch or see a mutual friend, she would call them up and just completely chew them out and cut them from her life. Regarding the divorce, she said in a letter to Vanity Fair that Ted wanted, quote, an amicable divorce in which everything would be shared, but thereafter he took the very different course of both hoarding income and assets and concealing assets, even after repeated disclosure orders by our state Supreme Court. However, it was reported that it was quite the contrary to what she was claiming, that Ted was very forthcoming, he was in full compliance, and his legal team even provided 45,000 pages of financial records. So, after divorce proceedings got underway in the summer of 2000, Ted purchased a 10th floor apartment on 5th Avenue with the impression that Generosa and the kids could live there. Generosa, however, had other plans. So she had already found a townhouse that she loved just off 5th. It was a $9 million townhouse and Ted bought it for her. And then they also agreed on a $1 million renovation budget. So he decided to move into the 10th floor apartment and then Generosa was going to live in this townhouse she found, but while renovations were underway, she was basically like gutting the whole townhouse. So she couldn't live there. She went and lived in the Stanhope Hotel, which is like this really bougie hotel. It was $1,500 a night for just her suite. And then she also got another room for the kids, the nanny, and then 2 more rooms for members of the townhouse work crew. And one of the members of the work crew was this 38-year-old guy named Danny Pelosi. He was the polar opposite of Generosa, where she was used to the finer things and a lavish lifestyle now. He really was not. He had a history of drug and alcohol abuse. He had a criminal record, mostly of DUI related charges. And he was also sleeping in his car because it saved him, having to drive all the way back to Long Island where he lived with his family. But he was also going through a divorce, so that, probably had something to do with him sleeping in his car and not wanting to go back to that place. He also had 3 children of his own, and it appears that he and his wife married young because his eldest daughter was 19 at this point, and all 3 kids were living with their mother on Long Island. His luck started to look up after landing the townhouse job, and he was not only the electrician on this job, but also the head of the crew, and he began, getting close with Generosa, recommending all of these elaborate and expensive fixes, which resulted in Ted spending a lot of money, and basically the townhouse being thoroughly gutted, all new pipes, everything. He and Generosa, Danny and Generosa, ended up becoming an item. Generosa saw him sleeping in his car one morning and offered to put him up at the Stanhope Hotel. And they pretty quickly after that began dating, and it was a really strong relationship from the beginning. They very openly cared about each other. They were very visibly happy together. I mean, how could you not be with all of that money? Like, listen to their day-to-day, right? Each morning they would start the day with breakfast at the hotel for the entire entourage of work crew, which was about $500. They paid the bellman $50 a day to walk Generosa's dog, $100 to bring their car up from the hotel's garage, which is on top of the $38 parking fee, all USD, by the way. All in all, the bills forwarded to Ted for all of their expenses totaled about $70,000 a month. They would always be at the hotel's bar and restaurant, and they were really just not, they would tip pretty well. Danny especially would tip like $100, $150 every time they went to dinner. I'm sure he was tipping with Ted's money because he would also wear these like fancy clothes, again, I'm sure courtesy of Ted's $70,000 a month that they were spending. And he would go around telling people that he knew people from the mafia. Generosa was just, I don't even know the word, right? So when Ted would come to pick up the kids, if she saw a member of staff talking to Ted at this time, she would fly into the rage and get this employee fired for just talking to Ted. And she would also go on these rampages towards guests that were staying at the hotel, accusing them of being spies for her husband. Not to mention, the 2 of them, they were really a dynamic duo in the worst kind of way. All of the things that Danny ended up suggesting for the townhouse blew Ted's $1 million renovation budget out to $3 million, which Ted was not happy about, that his renovation costs, which $1 million is so reasonable for renovations. That's crazy. And then it's blown out to 3 times that because of this guy and everything that he's suggesting. And then also he's just not happy about this guy being around his kids so much because of his shady past. So as time went on, Ted started trying to move on with his life while the divorce was ongoing. He got out there, started dating, met a woman that he started dating, but the divorce was really dragging on. It was really weighing on him, and the kids were getting dragged through it all as well, which divorce is never a great situation, but especially with kids involved, it's really not great. And they had agreed, he and Generosa had agreed on joint custody, which she ended up reneging on and filing for full custody of the kids. And she started not letting him, or trying to not let him see the kids on his allocated times to see them. She was also just doing a lot of other not great stuff. So there was one weekend when he went out to a theatre show with his friends, and Generosa had the kids, and during the intermission of this theatre show, he went out and he made a call to Generosa where she told him that her and Danny had decided to go to the East Hampton home, and she had just left the kids with the doorman of the hotel. And Ted, he obviously didn't go back into the theatre. He left immediately and went and picked the kids up. Ted also confided in friends that Generosa was actually trying to actively turn the children against him. So she was telling them things like he had mob connections, he was stealing money, he had bugged their phones to spy on them. And then the hotel that she was staying at with the kids, the Stanhope Hotel, was directly across from the Met Museum. And there's like this satellite sort of dish on top of the Met Museum. And she told the kids, you see that satellite up there? Your dad installed that to spy on you. It was to a point where he actually had to take the kids to the Met Museum and have an officer there explain to the kids why the satellite was there, and that their dad did not install this satellite at all, let alone install it to spy on them. By October of 2001, things with the divorce were finally winding down, getting sorted. All of the papers had been drawn up. They hadn't been signed yet, but they'd all been drawn up. Everything had been agreed upon. They were ready to be signed, and both parties had kind of agreed on the contracts that they had before them. So Generosa was set to get $25 million. Her request for full custody was rejected, and so they were going to have joint custody, 1 week on, 1 week off, but at this stage nothing had been signed yet. Also, at around the same time, on the 17th of October, some of the people that used to work for the Ammon family actually filed a suit against Ted for $7.5 million. They had worked for the Ammon family for about a decade, and coincidentally, they had become really close with Generosa and her new entourage, which of course included Danny. In this suit, they were claiming that Ted had gone back on a promise to pay their relocation fees from the UK back to the US, which they were claiming was worth just over $137,000. They also claimed that Ted, on termination of their employment, promised to buy them a house each, and then also to give them $2 million in cash or securities. They claimed that he cheated them out of $750,000 worth of internet stocks, and they also claimed that they had paid $25,000 for bills for the family at some point, and that he had never reimbursed them for those costs. Ted thought that this whole suit was totally ridiculous. Apparently he actually laughed at it because he just thought it was so ludicrous, the things that they were claiming. Despite, despite the suit, despite the divorce, friends claimed that Ted was happier than he had been in a really, really long time. The divorce was getting wrapped up. He had met somebody new. The divorce papers had not been signed yet, like I said, but he was confident that once they could close that chapter, and that as he was able to spend more time with the children, that they could all heal together. But before any of this could happen, before the divorce papers were signed, Ted was found naked and brutally bludgeoned to death in bed at the family's East Hamptons mansion, and he was 52 years old at the time. On the morning of the 20th of October in 2001, he went out to his East Hampton home, and although he stood to lose a lot of money in the divorce, he had gotten to a point in his life where he felt like time was more important than money, and one thing he was grateful to keep in the divorce was this house in East Hampton. He ate dinner that night at the Farmhouse restaurant, and he left dinner at about 9:30 p.m. He then went to a beach near his house, and he called his girlfriend at 9:44 p.m. And while he was on this phone call, he told his girlfriend that he had seen something that kind of spooked him, and so he was heading back home. This was the last time that anybody heard from him. On the 22nd of October, Ted's business partner, Mark, started to get a little nervous at around noon and just felt like there was something off, because Ted was supposed to call that day to make after school plans for his kids, Gregory and Alexa, who were now 11 years old, and he didn't call, and it was super out of character for Ted, because really his sole purpose in life at this point was his children. So Mark tried to get in contact with Ted in any way that he could think of. He called his mobile number, he called his New York apartment, he called the East Hampton home, and could not get in contact with Ted, at which point he started getting really nervous. So Mark, along with Ted's chauffeur, made the decision to go out, catch a private helicopter to East Hampton and go to the East Hampton home to see Ted, see what was going on, because they knew that he had gone there on the 20th. So they got the helicopter to the East Hampton airport. They arrived just before 5 p.m. They then took a cab to 59 Middle Lane in East Hampton to Ted's house, and they saw that his Porsche was in the driveway. When the two men entered the home, they were greeted by Ted's 3 dogs. He had 2 golden retrievers and a chocolate lab, and they said that the dogs, jumped up at them and they seemed very confused and very hungry. They were calling out to Ted. There was no response. As they walked throughout the house, they noticed there was blood on the stairs, and they went up to Ted's bedroom, which is when they found his naked and bruised body on the bed. There was blood everywhere, mainly on the bed and on the floor. And it was clear that Ted had been beaten to death. Of course, immediately upon the discovery, they contacted the police at 5:19 p.m. Mark called the East Hampton Village Police. They arrived on the scene within minutes and very quickly determined there was no signs of forced entry and determined that nothing had been taken from the house, nothing had been ransacked, everything, seemed to be pretty well in order. They did find that the house's very expensive, top of the art security system, which included 9 cameras, had been turned off, and the hard drive that stored all of the surveillance footage had also been removed. And this hard drive, of course, wasn't just out in the open in the house, easy to find. No, it was in a place that was really hard to find. Only someone who kind of knew it was there or knew about it would be able to find it and remove that hard drive. So from this, it was evident to police that whoever committed this crime knew Ted, knew the house, or at least had some knowledge of surveillance. The first suspect, of course, was obviously Generosa. She had the most motive, passion, they're going through a messy divorce, their kids, and of course, money. She really had the most to gain. They weren't even divorced yet, but she also had quite a lot to lose, because if she did get caught killing her ex-husband-to-be, she not only would go to jail, but she would also get nothing. The divorce was so close to being finalized, and so she was on track to get $25 million and also her $9 million townhouse with $3 million worth of renovations. After the murder, Ted's bank was told to hold all of his assets while the investigation was underway. And the investigation, it was a huge investigation. It was going to take a really long time to go through everything and figure out who had done this and what the motive was and go through all the evidence. And while it was ongoing, this was a huge case in the media. It was massive, and they really circled in on Generosa. She did have a solid alibi of being in her Manhattan home at the time of the murder, or the time the murder would have taken place. But this did not stop the media from painting her as, the scorned ex-lover. And this was so huge in the media because it really had all of the makings of what Hollywood wants to see, you know what I mean? It's a murder in a place where murders don't really happen. It's this wealthy, very, very wealthy, successful man. It's the Great Gatsby. It's jealousy, a scorned lover. There's all these conspiracies. It's exactly the sort of thing that the media loves. It's something straight out of a movie, straight out of Hollywood. There were other suspects as well. There was just so much going on in this case. And there's other suspects, like I said, his new girlfriend, Ted's new girlfriend, his business partner, Mark, who discovered his body, and then also Generosa's new boyfriend, Danny Pelosi. Something that the police discovered in their early investigations was that Danny had actually overseen the installation of the security system at the East Hampton home where Ted's body was discovered, so he was one of the few people who actually knew about its existence. Danny claimed that the cameras were installed under Generosa's request because she wanted to try and catch Ted out removing things from the house, and she also just, wanted to spy on him. Unclear whether Ted knew about these cameras. I'm assuming that he did, because it was there was 9 of them. It was a whole security system. They were kind of inconspicuous looking, but surely he knew. Either way, it did not look good for Danny Pelosi because he was the one who had organized for the cameras to be installed, so it looked like he would have been a good candidate for removing the hard drive. He definitely would have known where the hard drive was and how to remove it. He denied having any involvement in the crime, of course, and his alibi was that on the night of the 20th, he drove from Manhattan to Long Island to attend a wedding on the day of the 21st. He arrived at his sister's house in Santa Mauritius at 1:20 a.m., which was an hour from where Ted was killed. He then claims that he met up with a friend to drink at 2 a.m. and was then seen at his sister's house again before 4 a.m. by his sister's daughter. Ted wasn't found until 5 p.m. on the 22nd, and the autopsy concluded that he had died from blunt force trauma to the head. There was also taser marks found on his body, which indicated that he had been shot with the taser before he was beaten to death. They did have some trouble determining his actual time of death due to the temperature in the room that he was found in. It just threw off the body temperature and threw off their estimates of when he could have died. So they had some trouble determining that. And because they had no solid time of death, it definitely made proving Danny's alibi very difficult. There were some estimates that he could have died as early as 10 hours after his last meal, which we know on the 20th of October, he ate at the Farmhouse restaurant at 9 p.m., meaning he could have been killed as early as 7 a.m. on the 21st of October, which gives Danny plenty of time to have committed the murder. I think it gives him like 3 hours to have done it. So after the murder, Generosa, Danny, and the children eventually moved back to Danny's hometown, which was Santa Mauritius, but they were still at the top of the investigators' list, of course. Generosa did end up inheriting all of Ted's estate and sold a bunch of jointly owned properties. Her and Danny went on to get married, and they were busy building their new life together until tragedy struck months later and Generosa was diagnosed with breast cancer at 46 years old. Now, Ted and Danny were amicable, right? Ted didn't love the guy, but they were amicable. Generosa, on the other hand, hated Ted. She was so resentful and vindictive towards the end of that divorce. She just hated the guy. She didn't even want his family to look after or see the kids at all after his death. She also didn't want Danny to look after the children at all, so she would always leave them with her British nanny, a woman named Kay Main. And according to Danny, the kids hated Kay. So this was a massive topic of disagreement for Danny and Generosa because, you know, he felt ready and was willing to look after the children. He saw that they hated this nanny, but Generosa didn't think that he was ready. In some recorded phone calls, because Danny liked to record phone calls for whatever reason, maybe in case he got accused of like murder or something crazy like that, he would record phone calls between him and Generosa, and in some of these phone calls he can be heard trying to persuade Generosa to, you know, reconsider the custody arrangement. Obviously, Generosa and Danny were having some problems, as is evident. And not only were they having problems, but I think the whole investigation and the fact that they were both prime suspects was really wearing away at their relationship. And so by July 2003, they decided to split up, and Generosa was now living separately to Danny with the children. And not long after, the next month in August, she actually passed away. She lived out her final days in the East Hampton home with her children. And once she passed, that left Danny as the prime suspect. He also moved on, met a new woman, they got engaged, and they also had a child together. Then in March of 2004, so 2.5 years after Ted's murder, Danny Pelosi was arrested and charged with Ted's murder. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no real physical evidence that tied Danny to the murder, but police had accumulated what they deemed to be powerful circumstantial evidence against him, which I'll go over now. So the prosecution was arguing that he had the most to gain in a purely financial sense. There's no, they're saying this is not a crime of passion. This is a crime with a purely financial motive. After meeting Generosa and living off Ted's money and getting a taste of the high life, he didn't want to lose any of that. And so he decided to secure it by killing Ted and getting all of that money for himself and Generosa. With no physical evidence tying him to the scene, placing him at the scene was obviously going to be a challenge, but they used testimony of multiple witnesses who basically claimed that he had confessed to the murder. A contractor that worked with Danny said that Danny had spoken to him about killing Ted a year before Ted was murdered. An ex-girlfriend of Danny's also testified that he had spoken about killing Ted and that he had also told her that he cried like a bitch during the beating. She also claimed that she asked him why he did it, and he told her that he just had a monster inside of him. Danny's own father actually testified against him as well, and he was kind of the bombshell witness because he actually came in willingly to testify against his son, and he claimed that just hours after Ted's murder, Danny had contacted him and asked him how to dispose of something when nobody will find it. Now, the closest thing that the prosecution had to physical evidence were the taser marks found on Ted's body. As it turns out, in the lead up to the murder, Danny had actually ordered 2 tasers, and he had even tasered a guy at his work as like an initiation ritual or something. Having a taser was actually a violation of his probation as well, which he found out from his brother because his brother was like a cop. So he ended up dropping off the tasers in this like police precinct Dropbox. But the real damning evidence about these taser marks is that the taser marks on Ted's body were the same distance apart as the taser that Danny had purchased. Of course, it's not quite a smoking gun, but it's the evidence that they had to work with against this guy, and, you know, they're just kind of accumulating a lot of circumstantial evidence against him because they don't really have any physical evidence. Danny's defense relied heavily on the fact that they believed that he didn't really have any motive. They were saying that, you know, at the time of the murder, he was only Generosa's boyfriend, so he didn't really have any financial incentive, or he wouldn't have gotten any of the money from his murder anyway, which, side note, I don't think is true because Generosa would have gotten all the money, which would have directly benefited him, and he could have just gone and, you know, proposed to her, married her, and taken half her money anyway. So definitely, you know, in my opinion, still financial motive there, even if he was just the boyfriend at the time, but I digress. They also poked holes in the witness testimony. They said that, you know, his dad, it took him a year to actually come forward with that information. And they also said that the other witnesses had reasons to lie. Another thing that they really hammered was the fact that there was no physical evidence tying Danny to the scene of the crime. And in fact, they said that the evidence that they did had said the opposite and basically proved that he wasn't at the property. They argued that the phone call that Ted had with his girlfriend at 9:44 suggested that, you know, he had seen something, there was some sort of confrontation after that phone call, that, you know, potentially somebody followed him home from the beach. They had an expert witness came in that said he believed that Ted was actually murdered 3 to 4 hours after he ate at 9 p.m., which very nicely lined up with Danny's alibi, right? So if it was 3 to 4 hours, then he wouldn't have been able to murder Ted because of his alibi. They analyzed the amount of undigested food in Ted's stomach, and from that they basically were claiming that Ted had seen something on the beach that scared him, and then a few hours later, after he had seen the thing that scared him, at the time of Danny's alibi, he was murdered. Danny's alibi was also confirmed, by the way, by phone records, and these phone records showed that he was driving towards his sister's house, and his sister also confirmed that she had seen him physically at her house. Now, the prosecution refuted these claims of him having been killed 3 to 4 hours after eating. They claim he could have been murdered up to 10 hours after eating his food at 9 p.m., which would have given Danny enough time to commit the murder. The lead prosecutor on the case said her best guess would be that Ted was killed at 3 a.m. on the 21st of October. Now, this was always going to be a really difficult case to prosecute. The prosecution went into this knowing that it was going to be hard because there's no physical evidence, and that it really could go either way. It was a 50-50 chance based on this circumstantial evidence that they were able to provide. There was going to be a lot of reasonable doubt in this case, and they knew that it was never going to be a slam dunk case. But one thing you have to know about Danny Pelosi is that his mouth is his own worst enemy. And right before the jury was sent out for deliberation, he went against his lawyer's advice and decided to take the stand. And he really dropped a bombshell here because he said on stand that Generosa had asked him to kill Ted, but he had refused. He also claimed that Generosa's alibi of being in Manhattan was false, and the cherry on top, he claimed that Generosa had said 100 times that she was going to kill Ted. Obviously, he acknowledges that this is like a figure of speech, oh, I'm gonna kill him. But he says that, maybe one time it wasn't a figure of speech and that she actually went out and killed him. In other recorded phone calls, Danny claims that Generosa married him just to keep his mouth shut, which, we don't know exactly what they're talking about, but I think we can sort of assume that she would want to keep his mouth shut about Ted's murder. In more of these recordings, Danny also talks about how it really does seem like Generosa murdered Ted, because the amount of blows to Ted's head, it seems like it was someone with limited strength, and so they needed to, you know, make contact quite a few times in order to actually kill him. It also could indicate that it was a crime of passion. You know, that many blows definitely indicates a crime of passion, but either way, he was indicating that it was Generosa in these recordings. But yeah, that was pretty much the trial, right? That's the gist of the trial. The defense was trying to argue that he didn't have anything to do with it. It was Generosa who committed the crime. They did acknowledge that she may have had some help, but from who, they don't know. Wasn't Danny. In December of 2004, after more than 2 months of testimony, the jury went and started their deliberations. They deliberated for 3 hours before coming back with a shocking guilty verdict. Danny was convicted of second-degree murder, and he started crying when he heard the decision. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, which he's currently serving at Auburn Correctional Facility, and he will be eligible for parole on October 14th, 2031 at age 67. Some of the jurors that convicted him believed that he did have help, that he either did it himself, had some help, hired someone to help him, or just hired someone to do it. But whatever their thoughts are, they believe that he was involved. The piece of evidence that really convinced them the most was actually the alarm system, the 9 cameras, the security system, because Danny obviously oversaw the installation of that at Generosa's request. So he would have had intimate knowledge of how to disable it, where it was, where that hard drive was, and how to remove it. Since his incarceration, he has appealed for a new trial, but this has already been rejected. And yeah, that's everything. That's everything for this case. I would love to know your thoughts on this one. What do you think? Do you think he had a fair trial? Do you think he was involved? Who do you think did it? Do you think it was him? Do you think it was Generosa? Do you think it was a combination of both? Was he rightfully convicted? My personal thoughts on this one is that he and Generosa did this together. I think they were a team. I think they were a duo. So I do think he was involved. I think he had to have been. It's definitely plausible that he did it by himself, but I really don't think so. I am inclined to believe that Generosa was involved because she definitely had more to gain. You know, yes, she was going to get $25 million in the divorce and the townhouse, but we all know she wanted more. And she could have gotten more because they were still married. And it happened right before the divorce papers were signed, which I don't think is a coincidence. If she signs the divorce papers, then that's it. She only gets the $25 million and the townhouse. If she doesn't, if he dies before those divorce papers are signed, then they're still married and she is set to gain everything, which she did. Danny, you know, he had less to gain. For sure, but he was with her. She definitely could have convinced him that she was going to give him money for it. She was going to split everything. They did end up getting married. And also the fact that they got married makes me more inclined to believe they were both in on it because, you know, spousal privilege. They're probably like, shit, we killed this guy, let's get married so neither of us can talk about it. The one thing that I can't get over though is that there's no physical evidence tying him to the crime. You think there would be something, but there's not, there's nothing. But again, they can't tie anyone to the crime, you know? The closest thing they have is the fact that he bought tasers, and a taser was used in Ted's murder, and I think that is not a coincidence. I think Generosa definitely involved. Danny, probably. I'm inclined to believe yes. I'm inclined to believe she couldn't have done it by herself. At the end of the day, you know, the worst part about this whole thing is not only did Ted lose his life, and he really did seem like a great guy, but also the kids, you know, they were 11 years old at the time, and not only had they spent all of that time going through this really messy divorce and seeing their parents go through this really messy divorce, but then they lose both of their parents and they have to see all of the trial and all of the suspicious circumstances after, and they have to see the fallout from all of that, and it's just really, really sad circumstances. I cannot even imagine. But yeah, that's everything from this case. That's all from me. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and hopefully I will see you guys in my next video. Bye guys.